The government puts a number on how many new people will get into the housing market as the countdown to the federal budget ticks away. I'm Patricia Karvelas, live from the lands of the Ngunnawal people in Parliament House, Canberra. Welcome to Afternoon Briefing. The government says 75,000 new people will be able to afford their first home after its property tax changes. Changes to capital gains tax and negative gearing have been confirmed this afternoon, with Treasurer Jim Chalmers just hours away from delivering his fifth federal budget. Mr Chalmers has promised to address generational inequality, but also exercise spending restraint at a time of global uncertainty. We'll speak to the Finance Minister and politicians across the spectrum about the budget in a 90-minute special this afternoon. Foreign Minister Penny Wong has spoken to US Secretary of State Marco Rubio over the phone. The pair reaffirmed their commitment to promoting a free and open Indo-Pacific, also discussing the war in Iran and ongoing efforts to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The Foreign Minister today announced further financial sanctions and travel bans on Iran. The sanctions will target 7 individuals and 4 entities, including senior officials of the Iranian regime. And the government has tabled its formal response to the You Win Some, You Lose More gambling report, authored by former Labor MP Peter Murphy. Handed down almost 3 years ago, the report made 31 recommendations, including a call for a total ban on online gambling advertising. Welcome to Afternoon Briefing, live on the ABC News channel and on ABC News Radio right across the country. It's budget day and the Treasurer is just about to hand down his fifth and most significant budget yet. It arrives amid a Middle East war, spiking inflation and a political revolution on the right as one nation threatens to unseat the coalition as the dominant opposition force. We're outside the budget lockup as journalists pore over the details just a room away from us. It feels like we already know a lot about what's inside the budget, with the centrepiece being changes to property taxes like negative gearing, the capital gains tax discount and the treatment of trusts. Here's how budget morning played out.
It is budget day in Canberra. The government has made no secret that solving the housing crisis is at the centre of the document.
All good?
Okay, let me know when you're all set.
Is that the budget, Jim? Just want to
Yep, so don't shoot any numbers.
Oh, exactly right. I'm trying to...
There are 5 major packages in tonight's budget. A fuel security package, a package focused on the cost of living and housing, a productivity package, a tax reform package and also a savings package as well.
This budget is setting Australia up for failure. The Treasurer is tenderising the Australian people for to prepare in his budget speech tonight.
Bit of a flick.
Election promises will be broken tonight.
There will be a major change to negative gearing.
Plus, capital gains tax concessions will be slashed.
It could lead to an exodus from the share market.
These changes will be hotly contested and that's just fine by me.
Younger people are being locked out and feel extremely frustrated with the position they're in around, their ability to become an owner of a house.
If this government cannot get its spending under control, then it will be young Australians who will be paying for this into the future through higher taxes.
The promises that he and the Prime Minister made 50 times over in their own language is about to be broken.
Can you rule out any changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax settings?
How hard is it for the 50th time?
The next time that the Albanese government makes an election promise, should we take that as a promise or should we take it as something that will change within a year?
I think Australians expect governments to respond to the situations they face at the time.
This is one of the Treasurer's most challenging budgets to date, given that he is dealing with the ongoing impacts of the Middle East war.
The war that they didn't choose to start and the war that they will not decide when it finishes.
The ceasefire is on massive life support, where the doctor walks in and says, "Sir, your loved one has approximately a 1% chance of living."
Tonight we choose the hard road of reform, not the path of least resistance. A responsible budget, a reform budget, and I look forward to talking to you about it tonight. Thanks very much.
has just revealed that 75,000 new people will be able to afford their first home after its property tax changes, the detail of which is to come when the Treasurer speaks at 7:30 this evening. To chat about that number and the broader narrative around this budget, the fifth budget by the Albanese government, I spoke to the Finance Minister, Katie Gallagher, right before she went into the budget lockup. Minister, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on.
In just a couple of hours, you will be officially revealing the Albanese government's fifth budget. You have just revealed that 75,000 more Australians will be able to have their own homes as a result of your changes. How do you arrive at that kind of figure, and what time frame do 75,000 extra Australians will they be able to get their own home?
So that's the work that Treasury has done to help inform some of the decision making that we've made in the lead up to the budget, and what it shows is with the changes being made that we would see about 75,000 owner-occupiers, additional owner-occupiers being able to buy their own home, which has been, one of the motivating or most motivating factors behind our decision making over the forward estimates period.
Over the forward estimates. So does that mean 75,000 fewer investors as well over the forward estimates? Is that how you arrive at that? Is it a swap, basically?
So essentially making negative gearing less attractive and, making the arrangements that will be announced by the Treasurer tonight, results in that outcome.
One of the big debates, as you know, is around grandfathering people who are already on the scheme, or it's not a scheme per se, but who already use negative gearing. Is that fair? There is a view that gives them an advantage, people who are already on that system, until, they choose to say no to that advantage, when young people will never get that same advantage.
So what we're trying to do here is ensure that younger generations are able to buy their own home. And we know that that's been harder and harder year on year, and the decisions we're taking really aren't about pitting one group against another, or saying, or criticising people for taking advantage of arrangements as they existed, but to allow for, a better deal for those that are younger than me, where the opportunity for home ownership has become harder and harder.
That intergenerational question, though, is a big one, but people view it very differently. You say it's not about pitting people against each other. The opposition says that's exactly what this is about, that it's the demonisation in some ways of people who are older boomers. Is that a worry for you, that will be weaponised, and that people who are older will see Labor as basically having sold them out?
Well, the opposition, I'll leave that commentary to them. This is absolutely about making sure that younger Australians are able to afford the opportunity of home ownership, something that, generations of my age, it wasn't easy, but it was a lot easier for people of my generation than it is for those of my daughter's generation. And, governments can choose to ignore that and to, think, push it down the track or pretend somebody else needs to address that. We've focused on supply. We've leaning in on supply. The budget's already got some announcements around that we've made in the last couple of days. So that remains our focus. But, we have to deal with the circumstances of the time and the information we have. And that's about making sure that those younger generations get a fair deal too.
And there's been a lot of focus on the housing tax changes that we will see in several hours. But should we expect broader tax reform, or is that the end of the story?
Well, you'll just have to wait, PK.
I hate waiting.
Yeah, you'll have to wait. The speech is at 7:30 tonight. I think the budget's ambitious. It's got a number of different elements to it. I've been particularly focused on the savings side, how we get the budget in better shape, how we respond, find money for the investments we need to make. But there's a whole lot more, whether it be in, productivity, whether it be in reform across the board, the reform we're doing on the NDIS. There's a lot in this budget.
You say you've been focused on the savings. One of the criticisms of you and the government in terms of savings is that there's a lot of redirections, that it's not just paying down debt, that in fact it's, moving the money around. What's your response to that critique?
Well, it's a mix. The biggest part of it are savings, and we've been clear about that. A lot comes from the structural reform that we want to do to the NDIS to make it sustainable and protected in the longer term. But then there's areas where, I guess my message is it's not additionality. If you want to reinvest or have a new priority, then you have to look within your budget about how you're going to meet that. And we try and do that across government as well. It's just responsible fiscal discipline, really.
But yet, the challenge for Labor has been the critique that you're spending too much, that it's fuelled inflation. Inflation is the big story of our times, and you know how wicked the problem is. It's quite deeply embedded in our system, I think, now. How much evidence are we going to see in this budget of an inflation fight from the government?
Well, I think we've been clear that the net policy decision line is positive. That's unusual. So it shows we're saving more than we're spending. We've been thinking about it. I mean, we want to make sure we're helping with the fight against inflation, and this budget does that. But we also need to acknowledge that there are pressures coming at the budget. We need to spend more on the NDIS. We need to spend more in defence. We need to, investments in hospitals, in Medicare urgent care clinics, in aged care. So sort of the pressures coming at us aren't going away. We're managing them, but we need to balance that. And I think people expect that too. They want high quality services, as well as the government managing the budget. And the deficits are smaller, debt's lower, the budget's in much better shape after you'll see the results of this budget.
Are you worried that you've broken a promise? Does that sort of sit uncomfortably with you?
Look, I've been around government or politics for long enough to know that, governments have to make decisions. If they make those decisions and it's a different decision to what they've had in the past, then they have to front up and explain it, and people will have their view about that. But I also think the Australians elect you to govern and make decisions in the national interest, and that doesn't stop and start on election day. And dealing with some of these challenges, as I said, it's easier to push the can down the road, sure. I mean, and you can pretend it's not a problem, but the better thing to do, the more responsible thing to do, is to deal with it.
The Treasurer gave some, of course, he's done lots of interviews, particularly with newspapers and others. He made a comment about how sometimes in that sort of bear pit of an election, if you're making promises or making statements, they can be weaponised, there's misinformation, there's disinformation. Accepting that he's right, that does happen, isn't it the job of politicians to still be honest, not be afraid of being honest just because something might be manipulated?
Good
question, yeah.
Yeah, it is a very good question.
Come on.
Yeah.
You've got to be honest with people, don't you?
Yeah.
If you want to do something, you've got to say, I want to do it.
I think governments, you make decisions based on the information available, and you're dealing with things coming at you. I mean, we make thousands of decisions as a government, and, I think if you make them in the national interest, if you're prepared to explain and argue, and yes, it'll be politically contested, but the easier thing to do is to not, do it. And then, I would have thought you should face criticism for that as well.
Okay, we've seen in the UK, Labor get smashed by this building support for Nigel Farage's party. On Saturday night, we saw the Liberal National parties get smashed by One Nation. Are you worried about the economic grievance in the community and the way it might affect you in the form of One Nation, perhaps taking seats off Labor, or that broad sentiment going on in the community? Does it worry you?
Well, I mean, I think all of us who've been involved in politics and public life have been, are conscious of the role that we need to play to protect democracy and to protect trust in institutions and in the political system. So less about One Nation and more about making sure that everyone's got a stake in what happens in the decisions that are being taken. And I think some of what we're trying to do in this budget is deal with some of that, to make sure that people feel that they do have a stake, and that government is listening to them and trying to respond and make, in a sense, balance with all of the different competing priorities we have. And so in that sense, I think this budget tries to deal with that as well.
Do you think people want the system smashed, as some people are arguing? I mean, a lot of focus groups, people are saying you've got to burn the place down. Now, of course, it's a way of expressing a view, not literal, I'm hoping. But is that a sentiment you feel?
Look, I mean, I think that goes to my point again about making sure people feel they have a stake in the system, that it works for them. And I think there's definitely, you know, because of a whole range of things, people are working harder if they feel that they're not getting a fair deal because the system is structured against them, then governments need to respond to that and take it seriously. And I think this budget does that.
Minister, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's the Finance Minister, Katie Gallagher, who joined me earlier. Now, the Minister immediately clarified after that interview that she should have said over the medium term, which is 10 years, that those 75,000 extra houses would be bought. And that was the Finance Minister speaking about the forthcoming federal budget this evening. Well, Shadow Industry Minister Andrew Hastie says he's not open to a coalition agreement between the Liberals and One Nation. Deputy Liberal leader Jane Hume refused to rule out doing a deal with the right-wing party on 7:30 last night. Speaking to Sky News this morning, Hastie says he doesn't believe either party is into the idea.
I don't think One Nation wants us as a coalition partner. I don't think we want One Nation as a coalition partner. I think the feeling is mutual at this stage. We don't want to be in coalition. They don't want to be in coalition with us. And that's the reality.
One Nation is coming into budget week riding a wave of confidence after its landslide victory in the Farrer by-election on the weekend. Now they have 2 lower house MPs and they want to win more. Joining me this afternoon is Barnaby Joyce. Welcome.
Thanks, PK. We legitimised ourselves.
Did you? Do you feel legitimate?
Well, I didn't know we were illegitimate beforehand, but...
Well, you're referring to comments I made on Saturday night, right? Where I was misquoted by your people.
No, I watched it.
No, yeah, because you clipped out the other bit where I said coalition MPs... They know it said it. Go look. Coalition MPs believe that this legitimises you. You're always do it. But you're also here.
Okay.
So why don't you tell them why you're here? Because you like talking to me, don't you?
I do like talking
to you.
So you put me on the balls of my toes.
Yeah,
it's good.
Clip that around. All right.
Okay.
So they believe that legitimised you. They're actually right, isn't it? People don't feel like it's a protest vote anymore. They feel like they can vote you and get you in. That's the point.
I think that's fair enough. I think that, David Farley is a very competent player. He's been head of Australian Agricultural Company and Collie Cotton, which is the biggest cotton producer in Australia at the time. I'm an accountant. Pauline came from small business. It's a broadening base, and it has the skill sets, and the skill sets are being respected, and it's getting the vote. And that's politics. And I hear what people say. They don't want to be in coalition. Maybe we don't either, but they'll want supply and confidence, because I'll do a little bit of mathematics. There's 150 members in the House of Representatives. Unless you can go to the Governor-General saying that you've got supply and confidence, passing a budget and succeeding in a vote of no confidence or defending yourself against it, then the Governor-General's not going to make you the government. And it's amazing how many people want to be the Prime Minister and Minister these days. I think the deal will go our way.
You think it'll go your way?
Oh, I will put a lot of money on it that they'll come crawling to.
All right, let's not do bets right now. Let me ask you this, though. Tonight we're going to get big changes to housing taxation. The government's confirmed it. They say 75,000 new young people being able to buy homes within the next 10 years. We can't analyse right now until we see the budget papers, the veracity of that number. What we can ask, though, is does the system need to be shaken up, and do you have an open mind?
Well, I think we can actually start testing the veracity of their numbers. And as I say, Faustus and Nuno Faustus is an omnibus. If there are numbers out there already and they can't stand behind them, they can't put some meat on the bone on them, then all of a sudden you start doubting everything else. And Inland Rail's a classic one. Today I've just asked a question, I hope you play it, of getting some meat on the bone of how they came up with this $31 billion blowout. I asked for the 5 largest items in that blowout. And I said, if you can't get 5, give me 1. We got none. And they referred me to this report. Once more, a one-line item, 45.6. I didn't know you could explain $45.6 billion with with that.
Yeah, OK.
It's ridiculous. So let's go through what you're saying before. You talked just before.
Well, I asked you about the property taxes, which I haven't
the property tax.
Answered. So you're not into it?
No,
you're not open to it?
But what's happening here, I think also we have to look at this apparently is going to bring more, help people get into houses. I doubt that very much. Paul Keating had a crack at this, and we probably remember that. It lasted for PK, 2 years, and they had to reverse it because the result of it was a whole heap of homeless people. That was the outcome of this, because I think you have a static group of people who just can't afford a house. And when you bring more people into first home buyers, it just pushes that static group, which doesn't change, it's inelastic, down further, and the people at the bottom get kicked out and end up in their cars. They haven't thought this one through, and they haven't even looked at Labor Party experience about this in the past. And in regional areas where we worry about the poor people who do get kicked out, this one is not good policy.
Okay.
They're looking for money. They've found a very bad way to get it.
Okay. On the gas proposal that Pauline Hanson raised on Saturday night, Matt Canavan, the Nationals leader, and I think still your friend, but let's interrogate that. Okay, all right, well, you stayed mates. He told me he's dead against what you're proposing, which is a gas tax. Now, Pauline Hanson talked about an equity stake.
Yeah, I think that's better. I think an
equity stake.
Equity stake is
well, okay, you don't
so
want to call it a tax, but it's certainly taking...
If I go and buy a house with you... and I put some money in, you put some money in, we're equity partners. It's not me taxing you, that's equity partnership. In fact, how many houses are owned by two people? That one doesn't say to the other partner, oh, well, I own it and you tax me. They say we're equity partners in this. And that means you're on the ride for them when it makes money, and you're on the ride with them if it loses money. You kick the tin to get into the deal. I suppose in the future, if you want to get out, they can pay you out. It's a better idea for business because we do acknowledge that the Australian people want a better return. Okay. We're all on that page.
Matt Canavan says it's basically a tax, that's how he sees it, and he's against taxation on resources, any extra taxation on resources. Well, so he says that's a really different position to One Nation.
There is taxes on resources.
No, extra taxes, he says.
It's not an extra tax, it's an equity play.
But would it mean resources companies pay more?
Well, we would be equity partners with them. I mean, they would be.
Why do we need to be?
Because they're making money, and we want to be part of it.
So we want to take some of the money they're making, though, right?
Because
in that proposal, I'm not saying there's a problem with it, but is that the idea?
Because we bought in. I mean, if it's like me saying, well, if I'm a 30% owner of your pie shop. Am I entitled to 30% of the profits if we make money? Well, yes, you are, because you're 30% owner of my pie shop. And as a minority shareholder, we're not going to be controlling the management. And it also gives the Australian people a chance to have a real asset on the balance sheet. We've got so many flimsy assets on the balance sheet. I mean, one that the genesis was with us, Snowy Hydro 2.0, at $2 billion at the start, and we're up to $42 billion, and they're not booking in an impairment. Here's a little other... In accountancy, if you have an obvious loss, you book an impairment to say it's quite obviously not worth $42 billion. It's only worth $8. And therefore, we have to book the difference as a loss, and it goes onto the books.
Okay, so if the coalition continues to oppose changing things like...
What we're saying with equity, these would be substantive assets and a good asset to hold on the balance sheet.
The position they have, do you think that's out of step with what people are asking for in the community? Because people want
a better return from you hear that everywhere.
Yeah.
And you try to work, and we do. We've had sort of forums with the gas companies saying, well, here's the reality: Australian people want a better return, and we don't want to blow up your business plan. And an equity partnership is the best way to do it.
It's interesting. Just a couple of other personal questions. After the weekend's thumping win in Farrer, does that make you want to run for your seat of New England a little more, because you think, it's probably sure bet?
Fair question, PK, but there's two parts to that. First of all, it's the people of New England.
Yeah, sure, but you have to run, then they decide.
Yeah, as you know, the Greeks have hubris comes before nemesis. Let's not get involved with that. So I would, that's first and foremost, people of New England. Secondly, it's also a discussion with One Nation. You have to work. I like having the numbers in a team because it allows you to get a better deal. And let's get a bit closer to see exactly where the numbers. But does
Farrer make you think more positively about running again in your lower house?
It makes it very positive that people will... This is not an aberration. One Nation's numbers are not an aberration. They're real. The politics in Australia has changed. People are frustrated, metaphorically. I'd put it like this. People look to Singapore and they say, a swampy island off the coast of the Malaysian Peninsula has no oil, no gas, no irrigation, no cattle, no cotton, no uranium. yet its GDP is about a third to a quarter of what Australia's is, with 6 million people. We should be the continental Singapore or the South Pacific. And with that working balance sheet, those working assets, the only difference between us and them is management. And better management, better working of the balance sheet, and you can actually help your people. If you want to help them with rents, you want to help them with excise relief, you want to help them with that, that's
I've got from your answer that you are more positive about running in the lower house, but no final decision.
Yeah, that's fair? I think that's fair enough.
Okay.
I think that's fair enough.
Which brings me to the sort of strategy going forward. Does that mean, I think on Four Corners you told me it was a real Senate strategy. You think now it should be more of a lower house strategy?
Well, it's just a statement of fact. Senate campaigns, and I've won back a Senate seat and a lower house seat, the only person in Australian history to do it, and did in 2 different states. They're different because in a Senate campaign you're pitching for a quota, 14.7%, or 100 divided by 7, because there's 6 quotas and they've got a spare one that hangs over. So you want to be heard in a Senate campaign, and you say large messages and cut-through messages to put colour on it so you're heard. Lower house, you don't want to be seen as a risk. You don't want to scare people. It's a different type of campaign. And so...
So do you think you're less scary now?
Only you find me scary, PK.
I don't find you scary at all.
Everybody else likes
But do you think One Nation seems less scary? This is how you framed it.
Well, obviously on the weekend that's the case. We used to be at 6%, now we're at 6% primary, now we're at, close to, 40? So... obviously that's the view of the people. And you'd see a lot of the people who voted for One Nation were formerly Liberal Party voters, formerly One Nation voters, formerly National voters, and a lot of Labor voters. Remember, Labor didn't even turn up. Labor didn't even turn up, PK, and I was at the booths and they were saying, if they don't bother turning up, I'm voting One Nation, because you don't respect me if you don't turn up.
That's an interesting point. Barnaby Joyce, always great to speak to you. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure.
And that was One Nation MP Barnaby Joyce talking ahead of the federal budget, which is tonight, and following the Farrer by-election. Shadow Treasurer Tim Wilson says the government is going to kneecap the future of young Australians in tonight's budget. Wilson says the changes to tax settings in the budget will effectively amount to a tax on home deposits.
This budget is setting Australia up for failure. It is focused on how it raids the future aspiration, hopes and dreams of young Australians, so this government, which can't pull its belt in, can find a way to pull your belt in. Worse than that, the government is now leaking out details from their budget bunker that they are lifting the ladder of opportunity up from young Australians so they can increase the volume of revenue.
Labor has handed down its formal response to former MP Peter Murphy's gambling advertising report today. The report, handed down in June 2023, had 31 recommendations, including a call for a total ban on online gambling advertising. Health Minister Mark Butler defended the decision to release its response on Budget Day.
The Prime Minister stood up at the National Press Club, Emma, and outlined, as the head of government, outlined further actions we were taking to deal with gambling addiction, particularly advertising, but other elements as well, building on some of the really strong action we've been taking over the last 4 years. So I don't think someone can make the criticism that we've been hiding that response. The Prime Minister went down to the Press Club and made a televised speech about it.
Kate Chaney is the independent MP for Curtin and a firm advocate of gambling reform. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Patricia.
Well, Mark Butler was arguing there that actually the Prime Minister turned up to the Press Club and announced the gambling reforms, so there were a lot of bells and whistles, a lot was spoken about for that, so that they're not hiding anything by responding to it today. What do you say to that?
Well, that was on Easter Thursday. And now the formal response is literally when most of the political journalists in the country are locked up. So it's hard not to be pretty cynical about the government not wanting to draw attention to this. We've waited 1,051 days for a response, and today is the day we've got the response. The government does not want to draw attention to this package.
No, and part of the response is them responding to the recommendations. What do you make of the way they've handled those recommendations?
Well, after all that time, it just says the government notes recommendations 1 to 31 and then lists the reform package, which at best refers to 3 or 4 of those recommendations. And it is exactly what the gambling industry wants. It's focusing on offshore providers, which is exactly what tobacco companies did too. And it's reinforcing the personal responsibility affordability narrative, saying it's about financial counselling and awareness, not treating it as a public health issue. So it doesn't phase out online gambling ads, which is exactly what the committee unanimously agreed on, and it doesn't treat the matter as a public health issue with a national regulator or banning inducements. There's a whole lot of really good stuff in there that the government could be acting on, and it's not going to do it.
Do you think that they may change their minds if you continue campaigning around this, or have they really neutralised the issue? It's gone off the radar a little bit.
I don't think it's neutralised, and there's new polling that came out today that shows 3 out of 4 Australians want to see a total ban on ads for online gambling, and that actually includes more than 4 in 5 Labor voters. So I think the government will continue to get pressure on this, and it's not too late to turn that into a decent reform package. Tobacco didn't go in a day. These things take time, but there's no doubt that it is directionally correct to move towards a total phase out.
I want to move to some other issues. Tonight, the big housing reforms will be announced. The government's quantified it. They say 75,000 young Australians or new home buyers, I don't know if we can be sure of what ages people will be, but will be able to go into the property market as a result. Does that sound about fair?
Well, I don't know what the number is, and I think we can know that they're probably not as young as they would have been a generation ago when buying their first house. I certainly, in my electorate, where lots of people do benefit from the current tax treatment, people say, I worry about my kids and grandkids and that they're not going to get the opportunities that I get. So this change won't create more housing, but it will move more houses from being owned by investors to being owned by people who want to live there. I've been advocating for this from the very, I think the first interview I did in the 22 campaign was on tax reform, and it's good to see some movement in there. I'm slightly concerned about how they're going to deal with capital gains tax concessions for investments in businesses, because we do need to make sure that, that those investments that add to productivity continue to happen. But certainly on the housing front, I think this is what's needed.
So you're calling for a carve-out for those kinds of businesses? We're talking about startups here, particularly tech, venture capital. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I haven't. I'm about to go into the budget lockup and I'll find out what the government's plan is to deal with that. I think there does need to be some plan, because one of the purposes of this is to shift investment from passive assets, houses just sit there, into active investment or productive investments like businesses that add to the economic life of our country.
I'd love to get you just finally on the result in Farrer, which was really a political earthquake in many ways, One Nation being able to win a lower house seat for the first time. Do you see it as an aberration, or do you think there is a significant political trend on?
Well, I think the significant political trend is that people are deeply disillusioned with the major parties. What we saw in Farrer with the Liberal Party preferencing One Nation, I think will not go down well in my electorate, and it is a sign that the Liberal Party really doesn't know, who they are, and seem to be shifting more to the right, which will not be popular in urban seats. So times are changing, but the one thing that isn't changing is we're seeing a continuation of that long-term decline in support for the major parties.
So you're saying that in a seat like yours, which of course you were able to win, that was in Liberal hands for a long time, that you will campaign on this, saying, well, they've done a deal with One Nation. Is that your intention?
Well, I think that people will come to their own conclusions about what that means, about the values alignment of the Liberal Party, but I don't think there'd be too many people in my electorate who think that aligning with One Nation is the right direction for the Liberal Party to go in.
That's in your electorate, and yet people in some other electorates, like this regional electorate, decided One Nation was a better choice than the independent that was running. Do you see that there is a kind of backlash or a sort of unwillingness to elect independents, perhaps not in the metro areas, but in these regions?
Well, I think every electorate is different, and that's why it is so important that every electorate actually has a choice of candidates and isn't just forced to choose between red and blue. The interesting thing here, though, is that this is the seat of a leader of the opposition, and the last two contenders were not part of the major parties. So I think that's the thing that we're seeing now. Not every electorate would elect me, That's the joy of democracy, and I want to see there being more competition in politics so that every electorate has a choice.
Kate Chaney, thank you for coming in.
Thanks, Patricia.
Or on this stage here in Parliament near the Senate. Thank you so much. That was Independent MP Kate Chaney talking about the federal budget and the government's handling of its response to the Peter Murphy report on gambling, which was handed down in the Parliament today. Well, the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, says the government doesn't want to kick the can down the road on housing reforms. Speaking at Parliament House this morning, Mr Chalmers says too many Australians are locked out of the housing market.
I think people who defend the current arrangements in the tax system and in the housing market, they want to focus on those issues to avoid dealing with the substantive issues here. We can't forget the substantive issue here. And the main issue here is that too many Australians are locked out of the housing market. And the intersection of the housing market and the tax system makes things too hard for too many Australians, and particularly younger Australians.
Coalition leaders Angus Taylor and Jane Hume and Matt Canavan addressed their Liberal National colleagues in today's party room meeting, telling them they needed to fight back against Labor by highlighting the government's broken promises in tonight's budget. A little earlier, I spoke to Deputy Liberal leader Jane Hume. Jane Hume, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you, PK.
We are very close to the budget being announced. The government has revealed that 75,000 more Australians will be able to go into their first home as a result of their quite big tax changes to the settings. Isn't that exactly the kind of figure you want to be landing at, that many extra Australians being able to get their own homes?
I'll be interested in unpacking that modelling. I spoke to a couple on the weekend up in Farrer, and they were telling me that they'd been saving for their first home. They had a couple of 100,000, nearly a couple of 100,000 in savings, but they'd been putting it into ETFs and shares. Now, of course, that savings is now going to be taxed more because of decisions that Labor has made. In addition, they're renters, and their concern was that their rent was going to go up as well. So this is a young couple that are doing exactly what we want them to do, save up to buy their first home, who are now going to be less well off because of the decisions that Labor's made.
It depends how you frame it. They also will be able to potentially buy a property that a property investor isn't buying because there'll be a change to those settings. Isn't that something that a lot of young people, perhaps not all, but a lot of young people would welcome?
I think young people that have saved up to buy their home, that are now seeing those savings being taxed more, will be rightly cross that the government is taking away more of their hard-earned money, that they've been doing the right thing, putting it away, investing, wealth accumulating. And we know that there's a lot of young people out there who think that maybe they will never get into their own home, who have solely invested in shares and ETFs, doing exactly what they should do, saving for their future, and they'll be worse off as well. That's not to mention startups, it's not to mention little, innovative companies and tech companies that are relying on the current tax settings in order to get past that valley of death and get their businesses up and running.
There might be a carve-out for some of them. So there may be, more detail to be announced.
Well, this is interesting because I'm from the Peter Costello School of Tax Reform, and tax reform has to be something that not just lowers taxes, but it also has to make them fairer, and it has to make them simpler as well. It has to inject productive capacity into the economy so that the economy can grow more. I can't see how these tax changes will do any of that. So there's no way that Jim Chalmers can call what he is doing reform if it simply raises taxes.
If it changes the composition of who is able to access homes, isn't that just as a first principle a good thing? If it's not an investor, but it's a homeowner, isn't that the kind of transition that any party that's serious about government wants to achieve for young people?
Well, let's unpack that. The numbers that you've referred to are a holistic number about all of the changes that Labor have said that they are going to make in the housing space. That includes investments in infrastructure, a policy that the Coalition took to the last election, albeit the one that they have presented is a pale shadow of that. It's about $3 billion less. Now, can we be honest here? The problem in housing is one of supply. And just 18 months ago, Jim Chalmers on the ABC looked Sarah Ferguson in the eye and said that he could see no case to raise taxes, whether it be capital gains tax or changes to negative gearing, how that would have an effect on supply of housing. Now, if they've got data to say that they can change housing supply, that's terrific. I'd like to see how much of that is from these increase in taxes as opposed to other measures.
So tonight, the key question that your side of politics will be asked, because the government needs a pathway to get these things through, is whether you will vote for them. Is the instinct, that's it, vote it down?
Our instinct is always going to be to vote against higher taxes. Higher taxes mean that you get less of something. We want to see more houses, not fewer houses. We instinctively will say that if this is just a tax grab, a cash grab, because the Labor government is cash-strapped, well, that's not something that we can support.
And then the subsequent question you'll be asked, and I might as well ask it now, is whether you will repeal it if you were to win government.
Well, again...
How are you going to tackle that issue?
Again, I think that we have to wait and see what exactly is in the budget before we can make those decisions. And you'll hear more from Angus Taylor in the budget reply on Thursday night. Our instinct, though, will always be, if it's a higher tax, that's not something that we can support. We want to see more productivity injected into the economy so that we can grow the economy and everybody can benefit. This idea of pitting one group, one demographic against another demographic, we don't think that that's a recipe for not just economic growth, but a better society.
On that question of pitting them against each other, I understand if it's sort of conflict-based that no one wants that, but isn't that already baked into the way the system works? Young people are saying they feel like they are quite obviously benefits that older Australians have been using that they don't feel like they can access.
Well, Anthony Albanese and Jim Chalmers have been very careful about their use of the phrase intergenerational equity, at the same time as now talking about a tax that is going to affect young people directly and yet grandfather those that have already benefited from the system. That doesn't sound like intergenerational equity to me. Moreover, if you're not creating a budget that's got a plan to pay down that $1 trillion in debt, well, that's just simply intergenerational
they are
theft.
paying down debt in this budget, as they've revealed this morning. You don't buy it?
Well, let's just see exactly what it is that they're saving, what it is that they're spending, because this is the highest spending government ever. I mean, it's the highest spending in 40 years outside of a pandemic.
They have articulated some massive cuts to one of their, own programs, the NDIS.
Yes.
That shows some political courage, doesn't it?
It does. In fact, it was political courage that was shown by the Coalition back in 2019, and the government at that stage put forward almost identical changes to the NDIS. The Labor, then opposition, denied us the ability to pass those changes. Imagine the money that we would have saved had we been able to get the NDIS under control 6 years ago.
The Australian is reporting the Treasurer's new tax handout, to be called the Working Australian Tax Offset, is worth about $250 a person by the 2027 financial year. OK, that's not huge for some people. It might be, welcome relief for others. Will you stand in its way?
Well, I think the most important thing to understand about this measure is that it's simply going to be eaten up as long as inflation keeps running out of control. It'll be eaten up by bracket creep, potentially within the first 6 months. So it really is a sweetener, but it's not going to make a substantive difference. Unless you're tackling bracket creep, well, then this is not tax reform. This is just a handout.
Just on some broader political issues, obviously the Farrer by-election you lost on Saturday night. There's been a lot of, discussion about why and how. One of the big messages I think no one disputes is that people are angry and they kind of almost want to burn the system down. Is it wise to be standing in the way of change when Australians, and of course they all want different types of change, I'm not saying it's all one view, but are looking for big change? I mean, do you really want to be a party of the establishment still?
I think that people are looking for change, but they're also looking for vision. How will they be better off in 5, 10, 20 years' time? At the moment, standards of living have gone backwards so far and so fast. Just in the last 4 years, I can understand entirely why people are angry, why they want to rage at the system, why they want to see change. The question is whether what is going to be provided by the government today is in fact the change that they're looking for, and also the test on us, on the Coalition, which we felt acutely at that by-election, is that they want to see change from us as well. We've reflected on that decision. We know we've made some mistakes in the past, and we intend on Thursday to outline a very different vision for the future under a coalition government.
Very different. How different?
Well, I'll let Angus Taylor make the announcements on Thursday night, but I think you can see that we will be a genuine and credible alternative where people can invest their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations and their votes at the next election.
So what sort of a vision, though? Because there is competing economic ideas inside the Coalition that I've been, really interested in. There is more of a sort of idea about subsidising and helping industries here. And then there is, as you mentioned, Peter Costello earlier, that sort of economic rationalist view about the way you go forward. What does that big vision look like on Thursday?
Well, again, I'm not going to steal Angus's thunder. I think that's a very big career-limiting move. But what I will say is that there is a robust debate in the party room, certainly, but there is consensus that we want to grow the pie. Now, I think the interesting thing about the calls from the left and the calls from the far right are that they both pit people against each other. For the left, they say it's old people's fault and they're stealing from you, and the only way that you can get fairness is if you take more money from the old and give it to the young. And the right say this is migrants' fault. The reason why things are unfair is because somebody else is taking your job, somebody else is taking your houses. There is a middle ground that says grow the pie, don't chop it up differently. Both the left and the right want to redistribute the pie.
So you don't want to redistribute?
Want to redistribute the pie rather than grow the pie. So what is the message for Australians that want to see economic growth, that want to see productivity, that want to see real wage rises, that want to see fairness because the economic settings are right and it gives them the best opportunity to get ahead? Okay. That's what you'll be hearing from the coalition.
That's really interesting. So you want to grow the pie, which is obviously historically a view that the Liberal National parties have pursued, but you don't believe it needs to be redistributed.
Well, I don't like this idea of pitting one demographic against another demographic. There is a way for everybody to benefit.
How about if there's an inequality between those groups, though?
Everybody's perception of inequality is very different.
There are also core hard numbers, Jane Hume. It's not just ideas and vibes. Some people do get a benefit that others don't.
They do, over very different things over generations. There is no doubt about that. But I don't like the idea that we would make one demographic the enemy of another demographic. And that's what Labor are doing right now. I don't think that that's fair. It doesn't make for a good economy. It doesn't make for a good society. But this is Labor's modus operandi.
Independent MP Helen Haines says the zeitgeist absolutely is with Pauline Hanson right now. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, well, I think we certainly saw that in Farrer on the weekend because the Teal independent that Helen Haines was helping...
Well, she was supported by Climate 200, to be fair, but that was not entirely her base. I just think it's fair to reflect that.
She was a Teal. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
She says she isn't, so...
Well, of course, but if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it tends to be a duck, and she was being supported by Climate 200, as are the Teal independents. So Helen Haines was helping the Teal independent, and, you know, I was really interested to see how... I mean, Michelle Millthorpe's a nice woman, don't get me wrong, but I was interested to see how her vote didn't shift dramatically the way it had just in 2025. And I think that, you know, there's going to be an awful lot of reflection for the Teals on what that means for them.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you, PK.
And that's the Deputy Liberal leader, Jane Hume, who spoke to me before she went into the budget lockup, which is currently happening. And at 7:30 tonight, of course, the Treasurer will reveal his budget. Now, the government expects a campaign against its tax changes, as well as a push for them to go further. To get a sample of opinion from business and unions, I spoke to Michelle O'Neill, who is the President of the Australian Council of Trade Unions, and Brand Black, who is the Chief Executive of the Business Council of Australia. Michelle O'Neill, Brand Black, welcome to the program.
Hi, Patricia.
We are just a couple of hours away from the budget being officially released, but we have had the government tell us broadly what their ambition for this budget is, a reforming budget, and a message about basically getting the pace of change really accelerated tonight. Brand, beginning with you, is that the right message for these times?
We think the message has got to be focused on resilience. We've got real challenges that have been exposed through the Straits of Hormuz crisis, which is still ongoing, but those challenges reflect issues that have been very much at the forefront of our thinking now for a number of years. We saw supply challenges during COVID. We've had the imposition of tariffs by the United States, and again, different types of supply challenges with the Straits. So our message is let's focus on resilience, but in doing that, we see the budget as an opportunity to address two core components of that. The first is making sure that we're fiscally strong, and we need to be much fiscally stronger, particularly given the uncertainty in the world around us. And the second point is we have to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to drive up living standards. And that comes down to how effectively we can deliver productivity improvements through increasing business investment.
Michelle?
Well, I think it's really important that we see a budget tonight that makes Australia fairer, and that's what working people are looking for, Patricia. We want to make sure that we have a fairer system, a fairer housing system, because way too many workers are being locked out of housing, not being able to afford to live near where they work or in their own communities, and young people, particularly young people, are just locked out of the housing market, rising costs and rents. So having a fairer system for housing, which can really make sure that it's more affordable and more accessible, is a critical thing. The other thing is we want to see some cost of living relief. It's a difficult time for people, and they're bearing the brunt of Donald Trump's war. And we want to see something that comes to workers to recognise that. And then the third thing I'd say is we want to make sure that Australia's more secure in terms of fuel security. So what the government's already been doing, leaning in to making a difference in terms of making sure we've got the fuel we need, we're happy to see that there's going to be more efforts. It's what we want to see, more efforts to make sure, because you know why? They're job-saving measures. That's what it is. If we've got the fuel we need, the fertiliser we need, that saves jobs.
So there's a few things we do know, that property taxes will be changed. The extent and exactly how that looks will be revealed very soon. But Brand, do you broadly think there is a case for changing those property taxes?
Well, look, what we've said consistently is, certainly with respect to CGT reform on property, we've said that we would like to see that type of reform occur in the context of much broader tax reform. So much broader tax reform that incorporates the consumption, the company, the individual, and of course the state taxes as well. We've said that in any case, what we should be looking at, and this is how we'll be assessing any CGT reforms that are confirmed in this evening's budget, they shouldn't be applied retrospectively. They shouldn't come at the detriment of investment in new housing. And they really do need to make sure that if there are revenue gains that accrue to the Commonwealth, they should be pumped back into tax relief or alternatively some productivity enhancing measures. So that's what we'll be looking for tonight.
On these tax reforms, there is, Brand's not the only person who's been making the case, Allegra Spender too, that perhaps you need to deal with the structural issues in the income tax system. So you link the two. Are you looking for broader reform like that?
Well, we really want to see urgent reform about these taxes that really affect housing and people's access to housing. It's so long overdue. I mean, we tax workers more than we tax wealth, and housing is a critical example of that. And it's an example because if you take Sonia, she's a nurse, she gets a $90,000 salary, she pays $25,000 of that in tax. Her landlord, Malcolm, he gets $90,000, the same amount in income, and pays $2,000 in tax. Now, that's fundamentally unfair. We need to have a system that says that you shouldn't be able to advantage people that have more assets and more wealth over working people who pay their fair share of tax.
So let me go with Sonia. Should then Sonia, who sees a reformed system, also see more income tax relief through a different taxation system?
Well, we've got income tax relief coming on the 1st of July this year and next year, and we're hoping to see something in the budget tonight. We've seen some reports about other tax measures that will help with cost of living, so we really want to wait and see what that is in the budget. But I think something that rebalances the system and makes it so that working people don't pay such a disproportionate share is a good thing.
Bran, on that issue of the sort of workers and the tax system itself, using Sonia, because I'm stuck on Sonia now, and the landlord, because they are, there are real people like this throughout the country. Is that what you're talking about, tax relief for those kind of workers?
I think it's a really good point, because I don't think anybody would argue with the idea that there are intergenerational challenges in Australia. There really are. What we see, though, is that if you really want to try and categorise them, they come down to two broad areas. The first is that young people particularly feel as though they can't get ahead because of cost of living challenges. And the second, which is of course connected with the first, is that young people don't feel as though they're ever going to get a toehold into the housing market. With respect to that first point, we agree that it is entirely the case that people are going backwards. They feel as though they haven't been able to get ahead. They feel as though at the end of the working week they have less money in their back pocket. The solution to that is driving up productivity. That is not just business rhetoric.
And there will be a productivity package. Obviously, I don't know all the details, but you're looking to that as the enabler.
It has to be part of the enabler, very much so. But if we can get that productivity improvement, as the Reserve Bank and the Treasury have shown, that's how we lift real wages. On that second point, in terms of housing, we think that we've really got to inject more effort into supply. So we're hopeful that we see in this budget confirmation that there's going to be utilisation of the National Productivity Fund. We've heard the Treasurer speak to investment on connecting infrastructure and also more work around getting the states to be accredited on EPBC reform. That stuff really makes a big difference day to day because that's how you get more supply.
Can I just pick Bran up on the productivity point? Of course, we want to see improved productivity, but what we know is that that theory that somehow productivity goes up and workers get a fair share of that is no longer the proven case in Australia. In fact, even with modest or small productivity growth, workers have been getting a less and less share of that. So productivity growth's been going up slowly, but workers' real wages, they're 4.5% behind where they were in 2021. So it's not this magic trick that productivity goes up and working people see their wages increase. We need to do everything possible to lift wages as well and not just assume that that's the fix. And of course, businesses need to invest more in skills and training and equipment, in the things that are going to make the difference for productivity.
I would disagree with that characterisation because I think what we've seen very clearly over the course of the last decade is that productivity just hasn't risen. It's been 0.3% against the long run average of 1.2%. So if we are looking at trying to make the case for what we can do to improve the lot for workers, which is really what the overarching objective for all of us should be, we need to make sure that we're delivering those productivity improvements that come about by having more competitive business settings. Michelle spoke about how we go about making sure that we get businesses to invest. Well, you do that by giving them an incentive to do that. We're not asking for cash handouts. We're asking for settings that set us up relative to our global peers.
All right, final thoughts from both of you. You're both going to pore over the budget before Australians even get to see it and make an assessment. What's the one thing you'll be looking for, Michelle?
Fairness. We want to make sure this is the budget that's fair for working people and that rebalances the system towards them.
How about you, Bran?
I'll be looking for the future, and what that means is making sure that we are delivering on our fiscal needs, making sure that we don't leave a budget or debt that's unsustainable for future generations, and making sure that we set them up with productivity enhancing measures that give them a chance to realise real wage growth.
All right, well, they're the two tests you've set. Let's see later on if the government manages to meet both your expectations. Thanks to both of you.
Thanks very
so much. Cheers. Thank you.
Well, let's keep the budget debate going and bring in two economists from opposite sides of what you'd consider the political spectrum. Richard Dennis is the Executive Director of the Australia Institute, and Parnell Palm-McGuinness is a Senior Fellow at the Centre for Independent Studies. Welcome to both of you. Let's just start, Parnell, if I can put to you, the government's changes to property taxes, of course, lots of detail to come, but we broadly know what they're trying to do here, and of course there's long been a push to really shake up the system. Does the system need to be shaken up this way?
Look, I think it's the combination of negative gearing changes and capital gains tax changes which are a concern that we should be looking at, because negative gearing changes by themselves are really just saying, okay, we don't want people to be investing in housing as the first asset, offsetting their income against that. Whereas capital gains tax changes is essentially saying anything that people do to save, invest and prepare for their future is now going to be penalised in some way. Together, that takes away two ways in which Australians have aspired to become financially secure and to become financially independent over time. So I think that this is going to be something really big taken away from young people when they realise what's happening, is because it is most young Australians really want to get ahead. They are worried about the amount of tax they're paying. They think that they're going to pay more tax in future because they have a sense of the debt. But they also think that the government doesn't spend their money very well, and so they would prefer to keep more of their tax than for more of it to go on government services. Okay, it's an interesting point. Richard Dennis, that combination between the two is what Parnell's raising. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think the same thoughts, the opposite conclusion.
this idea that if we just give big enough tax breaks to property investors, young Australians will have cheap access to housing is a failed experiment. Peter Costello did this back in 1999, and indeed he argued at the time, we're going to encourage supply, we're going to encourage investment, this is going to be good. It failed. We're in 2026. We've had this regime for 27 years and it's a spectacular failure. So it's long overdue that we change this. And yeah, look, I think young Australians understand that the housing market isn't working for them. Housing is not getting more and more affordable. And yeah, I think Labor are on to not just a political winner, but good economic policy. The 50% capital gains tax discount was arbitrary. Like, why not 40? Why not 60? Because Peter Costello invented 50. Right, this is an arbitrary decision made 27 years ago. House prices have gone through the roof since then. Young people can see it for what it is. Treasury's seen the problem for years. It's long overdue that we fix it, and I think it'll be popular.
Parnell, the idea of house prices going up a lot, I mean, that is indisputable. They have skyrocketed, right?
Absolutely. There is a lot of demand for houses in Australia coming from a lot of different quarters. And of course, investment can contribute to that. But that investment isn't just people getting homes in order to negatively gear them and rent them out. It's all kinds of different homes. So what you need to look at with this, and I note that the government has put out modelling which suggests how many homes are now going to be available to young people which weren't before. What we really need to know about that is what kind of homes are they? Because in many ways, young people have had access to apartments at lower prices for some time now. They don't have the same capital growth, which is partly what people look for in a home that they're going to be investing in long term. So if this is going to free up more assets which don't go forward, which don't help people grow their wealth, then that will also not be a great outcome. And just to hit back on Richard there on one point, actually the share of people who are wealthy in Australia or who have some wealth in Australia has gone up, while the share of people who are below the poverty line, which is very relative in Australia, has gone down just a tiny bit.
Okay, that's interesting. You've been hit back on. Is that a response to that?
Look, I just think it's pretty obvious to everybody that what we've been doing for 27 years has failed. If Parnell and others think that we should just leave things the way they are, well, I don't think anyone's buying that. More of the same has for decades failed. Other countries do it different. We used to do it different. Again, this is, we'll wait and see the detail tonight, but I think this is a long overdue change that's well foreshadowed. It's going to work. It's going to be politically popular. And yeah, it's about time.
Parnell, we know these elements. We don't know other things necessarily. We'll find out, 7:30 when the Treasurer's on his feet. That's not that far away. What else do you think needs to be in the budget to really shift the dial on some of the issues that we're facing?
There really needs to be productivity growth, and I'm not sure from what we have seen that that's going to happen. So really what young Australians want is an economy that is strong enough that they become as wealthy as previous generations had the opportunity to become. And productivity is where that comes from. So that means that when an economy is strong, when businesses are strong, everybody's wages start going up, because I can tell you, when one sector of the economy is flourishing, it doesn't remain contained to that sector. There are flow-on effects to other areas of the economy which go ahead. And that's what we experienced in Australia for many years, and that is what has ground to a halt. And the longer we wait until productivity is restarted, the longer young people will have to endure without the opportunities that previous generations had. And then it won't make any difference if house prices come down a couple of percent.
In terms of what you would like to see, I mean, not really a wish list necessarily, but what else you think is realistic tonight?
Oh, well, look, I think that what we're hearing here is that, in Australia today, there are real challenges that are new. They need new solutions. And unfortunately for Parnell, let me quote that great progressive Matt Canavan. We have to stop microwaving Milton Friedman. Let me quote other Liberal Party people saying there's no medals for being the last neoliberal standing. The idea that we're going to get trickle-down benefits if business is happy, and no one believes that. We've had decades.
Do economics
I listened. It's my turn.
All
right, let him finish and I'll come back to you, Paul.
This is not opinion poll. I'm just saying how out of touch this is. Now, I don't mind if the CIS are out of touch, but the reality is Australians can see the problems that have been building up for decades. More of the same, telling people to wait their turn or tighten their belts, and if business is doing well, they'll be looked after. No one's buying it. That's why One Nation's vote's growing. That's why so many people are worried about the cost of living, and that's why so many young people want radical change. And that's why people are saying, why don't we tax the gas industry? Go get $17 billion, stop giving our gas away for free, spend it on me. Well, that's what the right's been saying for years. There's grievance out there, tax is a way to fix it.
Parnell, I'll give you the final word responding there.
That all sounds very much like economics by opinion poll. We need good economics, which leads to actual outcomes for people, and that sort of thinking that you can just discard what has worked in the past.
If only it worked in the past.
Keep going, Parnell.
It did, and then it just stopped because we stopped using it. So regulation has built up in Australia to an absolutely unsustainable point. You can't, to your point on gas, you can't open up new gas fields because there is so much red, green, blue, whatever tape. So how are you supposed to get more of what you need under the current settings? Then you end up with solutions like yours, which says we have to tax it, which means retroactively taking away the profits that gas companies sunk into.
Like every other country in the world.
Well, as you can see, there is a fierce debate about these issues, which is, we wanted just to give you a little taste of what's going to happen later on tonight. Thank you to both of you.
Thanks.
And that's Richard Dennison, Parnell Palm-McGuinness joining me there. Well, back in March, Labor passed legislation to increase the tax on those with super balances of more than $3 million. It passed with the support of the Greens, who at the time said their support was a down payment of goodwill in the hope Labor will pursue more ambitious tax policies in the budget. I spoke to the Greens budget spokesperson Nick McKim earlier. Nick McKim, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, PK.
Budget's only a few hours away. The Treasurer says the pace of change will pick up tonight. We know there's going to be big changes to taxation, particularly on housing. Surely you welcome that the pace of change is about to pick up, given you've been calling for change.
We certainly have been calling for change on housing taxes, capital gains tax discount and negative gearing. This is a massive opportunity for Labor here. It's a once-in-a-generation opportunity to bring some fairness back into our economic system and to take real steps to fix the housing crisis. I'm not convinced, based on some of the forward reporting of the budget, that Labor is going to maximise the opportunity here, but we live in hope.
OK, well, we'll see all the detail, but one thing we do know is that they're likely to grandfather people. That means you stay on your arrangements if you're already in them. That's particularly pertinent, I think, to negative gearing. Isn't that fair enough? Because at the last election, if you voted for the government, you voted for the government thinking that your tax arrangements wouldn't change. It seems terribly unfair, doesn't it, to suddenly say to people, you've invested, you've made this decision, but we're going to take the rug away from you.
Well, the housing crisis has got even worse since the last election and even worse since Labor first came into government the election before. And a lot of that's because of the policies that Labor has put in place. The point is, when circumstances change, so should your policies. And in the last Parliament, Labor rasped some of the rough edges off the stage 3 tax cuts, and that was almost universally accepted as a good policy decision and a positive move. And again, the opportunity is there for them now to put some fairness into our system, to make super wealthy people pay their fair share of tax and actually do something to provide hope to the millions of mostly young Australians who've been locked out of the housing market. Unfortunately, it looks like Labor's getting set to squib the opportunity.
No, but on that question of fairness for people who've made decisions, why shouldn't they be allowed to keep an arrangement that they've only perhaps bought a property on the basis of the arrangement.
Well, maybe they have. Maybe they've bought 300, 400, 500 properties because the existing tax concessions have been so ridiculously generous. So if Labor wants to bring some fairness back into the system, this is their chance. Labor plus the Greens equals the numbers in the Senate. It is only a cap on ambition or a cap on political courage that will stop Labor from meaningfully acting on the housing crisis.
Is it really courageous to change people's arrangements that they have made in good faith?
Well, look, we throw around the word crisis a fair bit in this building. We talk about the housing crisis, we talk about the climate crisis, but there are literally millions of Australians where the great Australian dream of owning their own home is gone. They simply cannot get into the market, and they are watching house prices continue to soar further out of reach while they're working harder and harder to get ahead. And at the moment, the tax concessions are so generous for people who've already got a lot of money, who are property speculators, and working Australians are being ripped off through the tax system that makes them pay more in income tax than people who are already wealthy are paying on their wealth.
Now, I appreciate you have to see all of the details to make a determination, but broadly, even if you want it to be more ambitious, because you're different political parties, you might have different views, quite obviously, you're not going to stand in the way of change, even if you think it's incremental, are you?
Well, we'll need to be sure that it is actually a step in the right direction, and I suspect that it probably will be a marginal step in the right direction based on what we've seen. And certainly we're not here to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, but we want the package taken as a whole to be as strong as it can possibly be. And that's the moment in time that we are in now. This is the political opportunity that's there for the Greens and for Labor, and we are ready to work constructively with Labor to make the package as good as it can be.
I want to change the topic, if I can, to the political landscape as we're watching it. One Nation romped it in Farrer. Now, of course, Farrer isn't the sort of hunting ground for the Greens generally. Pretty conservative seat for nearly 80 years, and arguably gone more conservative now with One Nation, if you want to use those metrics. But the Greens vote actually decreased there. There is a change of kind of politics at the moment. Are the Greens actually losing out to One Nation even, with people who are, wanting more radical change?
Look, I don't believe that we are, and I think there's very little to no overlap in policy terms or politically between.
You don't think you've got some
Greens,
of the same voters sometimes?
Between the Greens and One Nation, I think at the margins potentially we do. There's I guess an anti-establishment vote there. I think in Farrer there was a fair bit of tactical voting going on amongst Greens voters. They're generally pretty politically articulate voters, and I think some of them may have voted tactically for someone other than the Greens candidate because it was basically a two-horse race. Having said that, what we're seeing in the sort of One Nation phenomenon is a reflection of a collapse in the major party vote, and that applies to Labor as well as the Liberal Party, and that is being driven by the fact that we have got a political system that is just not working for people at the moment. People are working harder and harder. Their material lived existence is becoming more and more difficult, and every day people are doing their weekly or monthly household budgets, the numbers are adding up worse and worse, and politics is not solving the great problems and the great challenges facing our country, and a lot of people are going to a party like One Nation as a result.
You mentioned that there are some overlap between your voters, which I think is an interesting point. That's how I've been noticing politics evolve too. What have you observed about that overlap?
Well, there is certainly some of our anti-corporate messaging and our position on things like monetary policy and the banks. I sometimes listen to One Nation or other sort of far-right senators giving speeches, and I think, probably agree with parts of that, or could have said that
So it's
myself.
where the right and the left are basically coming together.
It's always more of a wheel or a horseshoe than it is a straight line, Patricia, in politics. And as the horseshoe joins at the top, I think there are quite narrowly defined and quite marginal issues where we would have some element of agreement.
Yeah, and in terms of the people who find that appealing, One Nation looks to be winning that debate more than you guys.
Well, we'll see. I wouldn't read too much into the Farrer by-election in terms of the Greens vote. As I said, I think there was a fair bit of tactical voting there. But, let's see how things roll out. And
I'm intrigued by this. Does it mean you can team up with Pauline Hanson and come up with some joint projects?
We won't be teaming up with Pauline Hanson.
Even if you share some of the same economic ideas?
I can certainly rule that out. But what I will say is that there are times where we've put something forward in the Senate that One Nation has voted for, and that's the policy overlap that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's interesting. Peter Murphy was, of course, a Labor MP who was the chair of this parliamentary report into gambling reform. The government's already announced modest gambling reforms, but today they're actually tabling their official response. There's been some criticism about the timing. Do you think it's bad timing on budget day?
Oh, look, I think generally when governments want to hide something, budget day is a great opportunity for them to do that. So I expect that did play into their decision to release it today. And the reason, of course, that they do want to hide it is they've squibbed the opportunity for significant reform on gambling, and they're engaging, as I suspect they will on tax reform in the budget tonight, in some kind of marginal baby step in the right direction that they will claim is a lot more meaningful than it actually is.
And you don't think the public wants baby steps?
I think the great challenges facing our society, whether that be climate, whether it be biodiversity, whether it be housing, whether it be gambling, people want politicians who are prepared to stand up to corporates, prepared to stand up against the profit motive and actually do what is in the interests of the majority of Australian people. And working people in Australia are being ripped off at the moment by our tax system, which is favouring the 1%, the super wealthy and the big corporations over and above everyday Australians.
Senator, thanks for coming on the show. I was going to say we're in this area. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Nick McKim. Well, in some breaking news this afternoon, the federal court has awarded traditional owners from Western Australia's remote north $150 million in compensation after mining magnate Andrew Forrest's company Fortescue dug up hundreds of millions of tonnes of ore from their lands without their permission. The mines in their lands have generated an estimated $80 billion in revenue for the company since production started in 2013. Justice Stephen Burley has ordered payment for cultural and economic loss. Well, we are just next door to the budget lockup where journalists and economists are poring over the details of the budget papers. Richard Holden is an economist at the University of New South Wales, and we spoke to him before he headed into the lockup about what he expects to see in the fine print. Richard Holden, welcome to the program.
Hi, PK.
I feel like we know a whole lot about the budget that's about to be delivered. Perhaps we don't know everything you'd think, but on what has been formally announced, or at least confirmed, including the tax changes on housing, what's your assessment of the direction that the government's moving in?
I think there are some positives there for sure. I'm not sure that it's going to stack up, at least based on what we've seen so far, as super ambitious or reforming and other words like that the Treasurer has used. I think the negative gearing changes are a step in the right direction to level the playing field between owner-occupiers and investors. I think the CGT changes are kind of different paths to the same goal of giving slightly preferential treatment to capital income, which every advanced economy does, but possibly hurting the startup and VC sector in Australia. And the rest of the stuff is that we've heard about is kind of small stuff, some of it reasonable, but none of it dramatic.
You don't think it's dramatic, yet it's so contentious historically. So there is a level of bravery here, isn't there?
Look, there is, and I've got a dog in this fight. I wrote a report for the McKell Institute in 2015 on negative gearing, grandfathering it away, that Bill Shorten and Chris Bowen took to the 2016 and 2019 election. So I know at least secondhand the kind of scars that the Labor Party bears about that, and I think they deserve credit for being brave on negative gearing.
After being burnt by the electorate. Also, though, there's the issue, of course, of breaking promises. You've been making the argument that if you break promises for good reform, then it's worth it. Just walk me through what you mean by that, not through a political lens, but an economic lens.
Look, I think people are pretty sceptical of politicians in general, and, you know, we've heard about promises and core promises and things like that back to the Howard days. The world does change, the landscape does change. We've got, you know, what's going on in the Middle East and supply chains and so on. Now, I don't think that they directly affect the property market and things like that, but I think we need politicians to actually step up and do things, and I think we should acknowledge the challenges that they face in an era of a 24-hour news cycle and social media. So I'm willing to give them a little bit of latitude on the promise stuff if they actually do good things.
And then there are the spending restraint elements of the budget. We know a lot about the NDIS cuts that will be made. There will have to be more than that, though, for the government to demonstrate that it's bringing, you know, money, basically pulling money back out of the economy. What will you be looking for when the Treasurer delivers his budget address at 7:30?
Well, I think you're right that the NDIS announcement that Minister Butler made was very bold. That is courageous. That is brave. It's also very necessary. I think what I'll be looking for tonight is the difference between gross savings and net savings that's been focused on recently, and that the finance ministers, you know, come under some questioning about. It's one thing to save money in a genuine way. It's another thing to stop spending in one area and repurpose that money in another area. So I'll be looking at where the money's going, not just where it's coming from.
So is it your view that the government's been doing too much reprioritisation rather than just cutting, you know, turning the tap off full stop?
I mean, I think that's just a cold, hard fact, and talking about $114 billion of savings makes it sound like there's been $114 billion of savings, not just a repurposing of that money. So I'll be looking at that net number, not the gross number.
And then there's the issue of our debt in this country, and that's always been a political debate. We, again, got a bit of a picture about that today in a, you know, orchestrated leak from the Treasurer about what that will look like. So what's your assessment? Do we have a deep debt problem in Australia?
I don't think we have a deep debt problem, but I don't think we should be complacent. I really don't like looking at these nominal numbers of debt. I get why headlines of $1 trillion grab people's attention. We should be looking at our net debt position, so taking account of assets like the Future Fund, and thinking about that proportional to our GDP. On that measure, federal government debt is pretty low relative to a lot of other countries around the world. Some of the state government debts, particularly in Victoria and Queensland, are at concerning levels. And we do want to have the fiscal space to be able to respond to big crises. We had one in 2008, we had one in 2020. They seem to be coming down the road at us more regularly than ever. So I don't think we should be complacent, but I don't think we should hyperventilate about those numbers either. We should be looking at where we're going when it comes to debt.
And when it comes to the tax changes we're expecting, you mentioned the word earlier, the grandfathering word. We will find out tonight just the extent of that grandfathering. One of the counter arguments being framed now is that if you do grandfather all these people who are perhaps, you know, negatively gearing, that essentially they will have an advantage over younger people who won't be able to negatively gear. What do you make of that argument?
Look, I think that's a legitimate argument, and that's a drawback to doing this. I think you have to compare it to the alternative, and I think if you turned off the tap straight away on negative gearing and didn't grandfather it, that was one of the options I considered all those years ago in that McKell report. I think that would be enormously disruptive, could lead to fire sales in asset markets, even potentially damage the stability of our banking system. So I think that there are pros and cons, but you have to compare it to the alternative. But that argument is a legitimate one, and I understand why young people who haven't had the advantage that some older Australians have would feel a little bit cheated by that. On the other hand, those looking to get into the property market will benefit from the negative gearing changes, not being as likely to lose out to investors at auctions weekend after weekend.
And there are so many people frustrated. Just finally, The Australian is reporting the Treasurer's new tax handout to be called the Working Australian Tax Offset Watto. So I don't know how they're going to quite frame that, but it'll be worth about $250 per person for the 2027 financial year. They reckon it'll all be eaten up by bracket creep, though. What's your assessment?
It will be more than eaten up by bracket creep. That's just like a fact. I think it's a cynical political move that has no good economic bona fides behind it. It doesn't change incentives. It's a flat lump sum, so it doesn't change any incentives to match yourself to a better job, invest more, have companies invest more in their workers. So I think it's an understandable but cynical political move, and I will bet my left leg there are phrases like, "We hear your pain, people are doing it tough," and all those kind of old chestnuts come out around the announcement of that.
Okay, but will it be inflationary? Will that be one of the attacks?
Yeah, it'll be inflationary, but the question is how much. It's enough money to hurt the budget a little bit, but it's probably in the ballpark of $3 billion. There are plenty of other things that'll be more inflationary than that. So it goes in the wrong direction at a time of high inflation, but I don't think we should get carried away about just how much it will be inflationary.
Okay, we don't have that many hours left to wait, so let's find out if we are right about all of the things we're talking about. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, the federal budget arrives as the traditional major party binary breaks down with the rise of One Nation. To gauge some voter sentiment, we've brought together a panel of pollsters. Peter Lewis is the Executive Director of Essential Media. Tony Barry is the Director of the Redbridge Group and a former Liberal strategist. Peter Lewis also does some work for the Labor Party. Welcome to both of you. Starting with you, Tony Barry. Broken promises obviously can be weaponised. How do you see a broken promise on property taxes going down?
Yeah, all the decisions in politics are a risk versus reward proposition. The risk is obviously about trust, and trust is probably one of the most precious commodities in politics. Not just trust in terms of your word and honesty, but trust to actually deliver. So, there is the trust that he has appeared to have broken his word, which I think can be weaponised, and it's like accumulated scar tissue. You can probably get away with it once. He did it on stage 3, but it might start fueling voter perceptions. And remember, when he did break the stage 3 tax cut, his polling did sort of come right back, and Dutton was sort of getting over the top of him. Now, you can't say with any definitive certainty that it was because of the stage 3 tax cut, but I'm sure head office will be looking at that. And I think the trust to actually deliver, I think, is going to be really important, because in politics you never want to overpromise and underdeliver. And by saying this is going to address intergenerational inequity, not that in the next election, 2028, but 2031 is where voters might say, well, hang on a sec, you promised you'd change all this, and house prices haven't come down.
Peter Lewis, how do you see it, that proposition, and how voters might react?
Yeah, I think there's a risk, as Tony said, that 2 points start making a line. I think the bigger challenge for Labor is actually explaining what these tax concessions are, because the dirty secret of Australian politics is the only people who understand the taxes are those that are accessing them, and those that aren't using them don't really get it. Our polling shows that of all the budget measures, this is the one that's most lukewarm in the support, 46-23, so under 50%. They definitely need to create a narrative that they are doing something in the property market. But again, to Tony's point, I think it needs to also have an impact that is material in some way. So there's going to be a lot of detail about, I think, the implementation, whether or not their grandfather coming out tonight. But it does set up a real challenge, I think, for the opposition on how they respond as well, which I think is probably politically more interesting than what the government says tonight.
Okay, then the other thing is, of course, the seismic result on the weekend in the Farrer by-election. Clearly people are looking for, big things, different things. Tony Barry, in that prism, how do you see the budget?
Yeah, obviously, Farrer has changed everything in terms of the political calculus. One Nation have now effectively been legitimised by winning a seat, something we've been speaking about for quite some time. With One Nation now winning a seat in their own right, it creates a bit of a permission structure for what we call One Nation curious voters, those who aren't voting for One Nation yet but are thinking about it. And one of the things that's been holding them back in our research is the concern that it's a wasted vote, in their words, that it's just a protest. But What Farah showed us was that it's more than a protest. They are a legitimate force now. And that's something that the coalition are going to have to deal with, as well as Labor, because they are going to start appealing to that vote segment. And I think, this budget appears on what we've seen in the briefing to not be very geared towards Gen X. They're going to be the ones who cop it with those who are accumulating wealth and assets. And they're already a great hunting ground for One Nation. And 35% of Gen X are voting One Nation already. And I can see more moving towards that party right now.
That's a really interesting point. I'm going to give you the final word on this panel in a minute, Peter Lewis. On that question of One Nation, wanting to change everything and the impact on Labor, perhaps.
At this stage, obviously, the win in Farah, Labor wasn't in the contest. If there was a seat set up for a One Nation victory, I think it was set up for them on this occasion. I think the bigger play is actually outside the budgets, the global economic conditions, which, if this blockade of the Strait of Hormuz extends much longer, is going to have even bigger impact than the 5% inflation the Treasurer sees coming down the road. Economic conditions decline, outsider parties thrive. So I think that's the real both risk and opportunity of One Nation, that if the economy really goes south, Labor's in power, there will be protests.
All right, Tony Barry, Peter Lewis, let's get you on together again. I thought that was excellent. Thank you so much.
Short and sweet.
That's afternoon briefing for today. Catch all of the ABC's coverage when the Treasurer starts speaking at 7:30 p.m. Stay with us here on ABC News. Joe O'Brien is up next with today's top stories, and I'll see you soon.